Good morning, good evening. Whoever you are, wherever you are, whatever you might be doing, we wish to welcome you to the Silverlight Show. The Silverlight shines to illuminate that which lies hidden in darkness. For those of you joining us today, we welcome you in. As promised, as promised last episode, I've been doing a lot of research lately on a lot of very esoteric subjects. But one thing I got to thinking about with the episode that I published last week about the Baltic Dry Index was about shipbuilding. Now, shipbuilding is a very interesting industry. I mentioned that episode, ships don't just magically appear. It takes a lot of time and work to build any sort of a boat, from a canoe straight up to an aircraft carrier. A boat is a serious investment of time, money, and resources. And the bigger the ship, the fewer places there are that can actually handle them. When you start looking at the United States, China, Russia, etc., let's call them the big three, they have certain places that are associated with manufacturing big boats. Russia has fleets in the Pacific and the Black Sea. China has the China Sea, which leads directly into the Pacific. And the U.S. Navy has Suffolk, Virginia, and San Diego, California. So we can see right away that shipbuilding efforts are concentrated on the coasts, which only makes sense. You wouldn't want to build a ship in Nebraska and have to wheel it all the way out to wherever the heck it's going. Shipbuilding is already labor intensive as it is. Even if we consider something as primitive as a World War I era, corvette, it still involves a huge amount of man hours. Also, all those rivets need to be put in. You have to have people working on the boilers or a nuclear reactor if that's your cup of tea. That's just building the keel, not to mention all the hours put into refining the metal to making the screws, etc. Then you have to attach the engine, you have to build the decks, and make it seaworthy. Imagine, we're already talking about a lot of work here. Then you have to crew it. You have to train that crew. You can't just pick a guy off the street and say, hey, guess what? You're going to be on a Corvette today. You can't even take a person off the street and train them to drive a car that quick. It takes a long time for people to learn to drive a car properly. Yes, we all know that one person who's a natural driver, but not everybody's a natural seaman. And I use that word without the slightest trace of irony. So it was interesting for me to go over the Navy Department logs for the past couple years and see what the United States and China are building. Because like I said, naval strategy is built strategy. If you build things, that will show you what the next conflict you are anticipating is. There's an old saying that generals are always trying to fight the last war, and that is true. It's also true that for the Navy, they're always building for what they think the future will be. In the past year, while the pandemic was going, China and the United States both got a new aircraft carrier and a new amphibious assault vessel. China got a nuclear attack submarine, and the United States got a destroyer of some description. It isn't the Aegis, it's another one. I forget what type it is. But it really shows you what they're thinking. You don't use an aircraft carrier and an amphibious assault ship to fight a defensive war. Those are offensive weapons. Okay, possibly an aircraft carrier, you could park it in one of your home harbors and use it as an extra flat top to land planes on. It's not really what it's designed for, though. An aircraft carrier is designed to use its aircraft to go and hunt the enemy down, to project power, to go over there and do whatever it is they're ordered to do. That gives you your first inclination. But then the other interesting similarity hit: the amphibious assault craft. Now, those of you, well, probably anybody who's watched a war documentary has probably seen the landings at D-Day, where the Allies came onto the mainland with their ships and they're getting ripped apart by the Germans. That's no longer acceptable technology. I know in the 80s and 90s, the Marines were using hovercraft that were armored and were deploying everybody right onto the beach. But these are the boats that are designed to do that. They're like a command post that's mobile. They're there to beach themselves and serve as fire support and everything else for the troops that they carry. Speaking of which, I never looked at what the Marines are doing. That was a mistake on my part because their shipbuilding is entirely different from the Navy shipbuilding. I digress though. So why would China and the United States both be interested in sending planes and troops far away from their own shores? Well, the answer is simple: Taiwan. Taiwan has a rocky history. When the non-communist forces, because I refuse to call them anything else because it might be complimentary, left the Chinese mainland behind, they set up on Taiwan. The communist, so-called communist, Chinese, they stayed on the mainland. So the communist Chinese think that Taiwan is still part of their mainland. And indeed, until the 1970s, Red China, as we will call it, was not seen as a legitimate country, and Taiwan actually had its seat at the United Nations. It was Richard Nixon who actually recognized mainland China and arranged for the United Nations to change things around. And in doing so, he inadvertently left this for us to deal with today. China has never given up its territorial ambitions on Taiwan, just like Argentina has never really given up on the Falklands. It's not something they're interested in at the present time, but it is something they're interested in at some time. China is gearing up for something, and the United States knows this. Now, the interesting part is that China doesn't just seem to have its eyes set on Taiwan. There's another major nation just in that exact same area that China also likes to threaten: the Philippines. Well, there's another little nation that China likes to threaten in that area: Japan. And if you know your history, your recent history, North Korea, as China's little lapdog, loves to send missiles over Japan. So with China busy building amphibious assault craft and aircraft carriers, and the United States doing the same, it seems that's the flashpoint we're looking for the next major war. This is where the final vessel that China commissioned comes into an interesting... I don't even know what to say. It's just interesting that they chose to build a submarine. The reason why this is interesting: China is not like the United States and Russia. Russia and the United States built tens of thousands of nuclear warheads, while China has only ever maintained a couple hundred. And those, they prefer to follow along what France and Britain do. They put them on submarines. Now, the reason a submarine-based nuke is a lot better than a land-based nuke is it's a lot harder to target a submarine. Yes, they're always trying to develop new technologies to trace submarines, and submarines were the first stealth vehicles ever conceived of. But China has traditionally held a minimalist stance. They could have built thousands of nuclear bombs like everybody else, but they've chosen to go for a minimum deterrence strategy. Yes, they cannot slug it out with the United States in a full all-out nuclear war, but they can do a lot of damage. 300 nukes. If they only hit the top 300 cities in the United States with those nukes, that's pretty much the United States gone. Yes, the United States can hit them 10 times over, but realistically, you don't need all those nukes. You just need enough to make your opponent say, I shouldn't be threatening these people. So that's the big bluff that's going on right now. China and the United States are busy trying to show who has the biggest fleet. This has parallels. In World War I, people were trying to show off who could build the biggest battleship, and it led to a naval arms race. In World War II, the same thing was going on, and the Germans and the Japanese built some pretty astonishing battleships while the United States and United Kingdom limited the size of their fleets for different reasons. For the United States, all their ships have to be able to pass through the Panama Canal. For the United Kingdom, it was simply a matter of they didn't see any challengers, so they were kind of building for show more than they were for effectiveness. But since China is building its own version of the Panama Canal that will be bigger, that means they can build bigger boats to get through their canal. And since Panama has been grousing about the United States having such a hammerlock on the Panama Canal, it would be interesting if China was able to use its influence and get a complete monopoly on the traffic going east to west across Middle America. Again, with aircraft carriers and with landing assault ships, you can do this. And the United States would need the exact same to bail itself out. Now, realistically, neither nation can invade the other. The United States cannot invade China, and China cannot invade the United States. There's no way. They're playing a home game. They have all their defenses. They have all their infrastructure. In a non-nuclear scenario, it would be suicide for either side to even attempt to cross the entire Pacific Ocean and launch an assault. That being said, Taiwan is literally within a couple hundred kilometers of China. It's sitting right on their doorstep. Now, Taiwan, the Philippines, and Japan are all busy modernizing their forces. Why is there all this panic? It's not just because China is growing in size, growing in population, and growing in economic influence. It's because they're growing their military. And by building to match the United States, which the United States wants to have 500 combat ships by 2040, which is an incredible goal. And China's saying anything you can do, we can do better. Technologically, the United States is probably about 5 to 10 years ahead of China. But when you're talking about building boats, it's really not so drastic. I mean, airplanes, you can modify them, you can install new electronics, better radars, paint them with different materials. There's all sorts of things. Tanks, you can add ablative armor, you can add Chobham armor, reactive armor, you name. There's all sorts of things you can do. But boats, there's only so many places you can work with boats. And again, it's an incredible investment in time, resources, and energy to play with any sort of warship. So we're looking at what they both think is the future. And building a navy, you don't build a navy for it to sit idly by. Again, the purpose of an aircraft carrier and amphibious assault ships is so that they can go somewhere and show the flag where people are not necessarily friendly to you. I don't know when or if or how such a conflict would break out. I'm not even sure Taiwan would be the number one target, because that's where the invasion is expected to come. In World War II, the Allies spent a long time fooling the Germans into thinking they were going to land somewhere other than Normandy. And they went to great lengths to put out wrong information. So China right now is being very smart and doing exactly what's expected of them. This is a predicament. If China surpasses the United States in economic might, then it's going to eventually surpass them in military might. It might be 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, 50 years, whatever it might be. But the other interesting thing is that China is undergoing a population crisis. Right now, a lot of the Chinese population is older. And thanks to the one-child policy, it's primarily male. Now, the Chinese, quote, communist, end quote, red government knows this. What's a great way to get rid of a whole lot of young men? It's war. Because the young men sign up. And young men are the ones that are trained. And the young men are the ones that are deployed first. Sorry, ladies, you are fantastic soldiers. Silverlight served in the military, and I served alongside, well, every woman except one that I served with, I would trust with my life. Women make fantastic soldiers. But generals always think, I'm going to send the boys. And the women become the boys when they're in this equation. So if I sound sexist, I apologize. That's just the way things are. And the Chinese military is not bound by the politically correct mainstream mentality that the U.S. military is trying to follow. Hence why I said seamen, without the slightest bit of a double entendre. Yes, there are plenty of women on boats, but there's going to be more women on U.S. boats than there are going to be on Chinese boats. Because the Chinese government has an incentive to reduce its male population. Putting them on boats, which are great big coffins, and sending them to sea is a great way to get rid of a lot of people. And the United States, well, they're always happy to have soldiers and new technology to show off. They're happy to drop bombs because that means they can give more money to Raytheon and Lockheed. The Chinese are in the same boat. All that money stays in a loop that goes back to the top. Raytheon and Lockheed aren't buying parts from your local hardware store with mom and pop running it. No, they're buying from Magna. They're buying from, people like that. And the Chinese have their own supply chain in-house. Technically, China could really run infinite if they wanted. They could keep producing warships and put as many people as they wanted on them because they have that ability. The United States is the one that has to worry about budgets. The Chinese can simply use their infrastructure thanks to their hybrid economy, partly capitalist to get money from the West and partly fascist. And I say fascist on purpose because it's a command economy. Communism is by the people, for the people. Fascist is a government-run economy where the government sits down and says, okay, this year you're going to be producing 10,000 tons of steel. But sir, the mine only has about 5,000 tons. Then you're going to find somewhere to get the other 5,000 tons. You have a year. And that's literally the way fascism works. That's the way the Soviet Union worked. And that's the way much of China works. Yes, there's economic free zones, like, for example, the shipbuilding areas, but how they get the material is entirely different. We're in for a very interesting next 10 to 50 years. Now, hopefully, there's rumors of a revolution in China. There's rumors that all those angry young men are not going to go quietly along with the senior members of the ruling party. I don't know how sure I am in those rumors. But what I do know is in the next 50 years, of the two giants standing, one is going to fall. And right now, time is on the Chinese side. The Chinese have always been good at planning 5 to 10 years in the future, where the United States, the leadership changes, they only plan about 2 to 4 years in the future. That's what shows, because every time we get a new president, they completely revamp NASA. They completely changed the defense priorities. Everything changes just because the new president has different priorities. Whereas the Chinese have long-term leadership, like the Russians with Putin. Now, long-term leadership, not always a good thing, but the constant turnover at the president position is definitely costing the United States in terms of policy right now. But that's something we'll get into another time. There's a lesson to be taken away from this. It's naval strategy is built strategy. So what are the people building as far as their navies go? Because that'll tell you exactly what they're expecting and why the United States believes it needs 20 aircraft carriers when the rest of the world cannot field more than 10. That's the mentality of the United States. And that's the mentality of the world. Why does the United States have all these aircraft carriers and we don't have any? Just some thoughts to leave you with. If you enjoyed this, please leave a like, share, and we always appreciate new subscribers. For everybody else, we hope you have a wonderful day.